Welcome back. You're watching The Big Idea. In today's segment, we look into concentration in the economy, this with a particular focus on understanding competition laws and agencies and how they can be reformed to enhance a small business participation. Joining us for this discussion is Economic Research Bureau's Chief Economist and Acting Deputy Commissioner for the Competition Commission, James Hodge. James, a pleasure. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Olatunde.
Thank you so much for chatting to us today, James. I think it's great to have this conversation at 30 years into democracy. And I think an important one maybe to take stock of is thinking about what kind of economy we would have adopted in 1994 and the work that would have had, or we would have known we had to do to make the economy more open to inclusive growth and new entrants.
Yeah, so in 1994, we inherited from apartheid a very concentrated economy. And if you recall, there were a few holding companies at the JSE that really dominated most of industry. There were conglomerates across most of industry. And that has definitely unwound. And we have seen, in a sense, a deconcentration of the economy, but we remain in many critical sectors with high levels of concentration, and some of them really inherited. So you can think of many of the sin industries, the SABs of the world, and subsequent to that, casinos. But internationally, farming inputs have become highly concentrated in global companies. A lot of your agri-processing is concentrated. Your healthcare has become concentrated. The groups engaged in a process of acquisitions. And then financial services, transport, communications, all remain fairly concentrated in the economy right now.
Let's talk then about that, and about what leads to concentration. Of course, some companies established years ago, very different economic circumstances there, James. But is it possible that there's a makeup of the economy, maybe even the way capital moves and capital flows, that allows some economies, and economies like South Africa, more specifically, to remain highly concentrated?
Well, there's definitely that perpetuation, as you point out, and this is probably more in your traditional industries where there hasn't been major disruption. We are starting to see now where there are new products, innovation, digital disruptors coming in, we are starting to see some change. So, for instance, in your banking sector, yes, we now have more than the four big banks. We had Capitec slowly grow over time. We've got Time Bank, Discovery has entered. But certainly having the capital enables you to invest in building capacity over time ahead of your rivals. And also being the leader in the industry can also give you certain major advantages. So, it's no secret in healthcare, the biggest insurers will get bigger discounts from the healthcare providers. In retail, your big grocery retailer, we did an inquiry on this, use their status as anchor tenants to then secure exclusivity in shopping malls and just shut out. So there's a lot can be through, let's say, your capital investment, but it can also be through restricting competition and holding out.
You actually mentioned the markets inquiry there, and I want to speak about this tool as something that the Competition Commission does have in its arsenal to really investigate sectors and to see where we are seeing anti-competitive behaviors there. And I'm wondering if from industry, when the Commission tries to engage here, is this often welcomed? The idea, James, that we do need to open up industries, that we do need to open up the economy to have smaller and newer players enter. Are all sectors welcoming of that kind of inquiry, that kind of investigation?
Look, maybe just to step back a little bit, the market inquiry, why it's interesting is it's almost a pro-competitive tool. It looks to remove any factor in an industry that is restricting competition. And many of the other tools that we have are more reactive, that a large firm has abused their position in the market and we need to stop it. But promoting competition is a unique tool. I think a lot is said in the business press about the market inquiries, but our experience has been that actually the level of engagement has been fairly welcoming. So I think obviously for some incumbents it may be seen as a threat, But the way we operate it, it is more of an evidence-based gathering and really an engagement with the industry. You could say almost, for instance, our digital platforms inquiry, which involved global companies such as Apple and Google, Booking.com, as well as local players like the Nusfirst Group. But I think they were reassured by the robustness of the process and almost a sense of negotiation and discussion of outcomes that can work for them as well as achieve some of the objectives. So, for instance, across the board on that inquiry, there were commitments to bring in Black business into the fold on things like your e-commerce marketplaces, and remove some of the pricing that was really prejudicial to small firms like real estate or automotive. So I think, as long as they see it as fair and applying across the industry, then I think it's fairly welcome. But this is not a sort of draconian regulation or legislation process. It is more a dialogue. And that's why I think it can be a better tool sometimes than other tools that we have in our disposal.
Another tool that you have at your disposal is looking at mergers, acquisitions, and then even making recommendations there. James, I'm keen to also speak about that tool and how that is also used, to ensure that, of course, we are seeing, the best competition practices from deal making.
Yeah, so mergers, you could say, is one of those preventative tools in the sense of before someone acquires another company, they must come to us and we assess it for competition. I think whilst some of the prohibitions that we do catch headlines, the general trend is we're dealing with about 400 mergers a year. We're probably prohibiting no more than 5. And there may be a larger collective where there are some competition issues, but where we can find remedies either to dispose of part of the business or behavioral remedies where it is, for instance, treating your competitors in a non-discriminatory and fair fashion as you would your own downstream operations. So it's very seldom that mergers actually catch. And that is partly also because having an authority deters really concentrating mergers from taking place. But those then go to a full court hearing, because in mergers, we only really have the power to refer and leave it to the competition tribunal to make a decision. But all of the prohibitions we've done in the last sort of 4 or 5 years have been upheld by the competition tribunal through quite a robust court process. And I mean, if you look at some of those, for instance, it was Dulux Plascon and Paint, which is a fairly obvious thing that, well, who are the two big players? And so I think those are important safeguards, and we would hope that firms do look whether this is really a restrictive practice or not. But in many respects, it doesn't pose a barrier to deal making. Yes, it is a regulatory cost. It needs to be investigated. But the majority of mergers we classify as what we call phase 1, where on the face of it, they raise no competition issues, the shares are low, and those take very little time and very little resources. So it's really your big complex mergers that take more time. And this is where, as well, we get a lot of participation from other business. And this is what is interesting, is that if you think of the economy, it's not just about firms selling to consumers. There's a lot of firms selling to other firms as intermediaries. And there's a huge amount of support for the Commission's work from those that aren't dominant, that are threatened by either a merger that might cut off access or conduct that is really debilitating them from growing their business. And most of our complaints that are material come from other businesses.
I want to speak then about, we've spoken about preventative tools, we've spoken about proactive tools. What happens, what is the process for something that we might figure out later, after the fact, after we've seen that, there's been anti-competitive behavior, and that process also, James, and I've also heard some corners of society calling for, more punitive measures from the side of the Competition Commission, the ability to prosecute more for that, to stop anti-competitive behavior.
Yeah, so this is an area where we have been strengthened and we have improved our track record, certainly. So we call these sort of abuse of dominance investigations. and they often surface from a complaint, but also sometimes our own research might suggest that there's something wrong in an industry and we need to initiate ourselves. So take something we did late last year, where we acted against Johnson & Johnson, which had looked for a secondary patent on an important TB drug for resistant strains of TB. And we did initiate ourselves an act, and they dropped that patent, in fact, not just for South Africa, but across all low and middle income countries, and reduced the price by over 45%. Now, in that context, often we might be looking for the immediate outcome, and the willingness sometimes of companies to give that immediate relief means that our ability to impose a fine as well might be limited, because they may litigate then if that's the case. So we've got a balance between trying to get results and getting relief to the economy and consumers or government, essential services, versus those punitive measures. But it is after the fact, and you'll see there are many settlements. I think many companies realize after the fact that this may be problematic and are quick to withdraw. So it is a balancing act, and I know sometimes we face that criticism, and it is a tough choice. You know, we got immediate relief on COVID tests, only to then see the COVID wave sort of die down. With hindsight, maybe we should have gone for the punishment, but we wouldn't have got that immediate relief in that last wave if we had done that.
Another one that's also very important, I think, when we hear people discussing South Africa's economy is that, 30 years into democracy, it is still largely dominated by oligopolies. And I'm wondering if, first of all, 30 years is a fair enough time to really transform an economy to what we might imagine as more inclusive. But also, of course, I don't think all of that work sits with the Commission. I think there are other agencies within government and there are other spheres, within the private sector that may also be looking at transforming those economies. And I'm just keen to get your thoughts on that, James.
You're absolutely right. I think that transformation is something, I mean, we see it as imperative. For one, it's pro-competition to bring new players into, or black entrepreneurs into the mainstream economy. But it's also critical to have a stake in the economy, and I think is pro-growth ultimately, because you're bringing in talent and ideas that you would not tap into otherwise. There has been transformation in the economy. I think it is too slow. And in fact, we're sitting with our new minister and deputy ministers today and yesterday discussing some of these factors. And there is a recognition that it does go beyond the competition. I mean, what we are seeing, I suppose, is because the Competition Act has teeth to actually force an outcome, for instance, in a merger control or market inquiry, that we are able to get results, whereas some of the other tools are more, let's say, trying to incentivize companies to bring about that change. So I think there's a lot more that can be done, and a lot more that can be done also on the funding side. I think often the banks are quick to or accept that their risk profile is not such that they're going to take heavy risks on this. We've looked to try and change at least the venture capital industry to have a mandate to support black business and direct some of their funding there. But this should be a collective effort, and it is something where we think it's in everyone's interest. There may be short-term interests around keeping your hold as a company on a particular sector. But if there isn't transformation and more inclusiveness, then we're sitting with a very volatile economy that's going to see considerable unrest that will undermine all investment. And it sort of bubbles up at different times and with different effect. But the reality is that in the current environment, with high food prices and in a difficult economic environment, that unless we can change that inclusion, we are going to have a more volatile social situation.
Another interesting outcome of competition is innovation, James. I want to get your thoughts on that one as well. Is that we could actually be a more innovative society, with more groundbreaking, creations and all sorts of new products and services emerging here if we were more competitive. And I think it's something maybe that we don't speak about often when we speak about competition, how exciting it could make our country and our economy.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And given that we are in such an innovative phase globally, I think it is interesting to see. We were reminded recently in a particular case that your fiber to the home didn't involve any of the classic telco companies. It was all startups, some which have grown incredibly large now, but it was nimble players who saw the opportunity. And even in sort of small outlying towns, sort of recognize here's a business opportunity, let me take advantage. Opportunities that weren't seen by the big players necessarily. I mean, the other example we often use is almost the concentration in retail. If you go into many shopping malls, you're faced with very little option. But go onto a marketplace like Takealot or Amazon, and I think part of the joy for the consumers is just the range that they can see and the different products that are available. And that's the kind of innovation and ideas that can come to the fore when you do have competition. And you've got the disruption, the disruption, like I mentioned, of a time bank just going with a different business model without the legacy and being able to bring new products. Things like the Yoko that now for any market person sitting selling goods at a spaza shop or in a market now can do transactions at a very low cost. So there's a lot of great innovation that can happen, and it's just giving the space for that to occur and allow that to develop, I think, is so important for growth and productivity.
And before I let you go, as you've mentioned, you have been sitting with the new minister, the new deputy ministers here. From your perspective as the commission, anything on your wish list, support that you would like to get to further do your work, and some of what you'd like to see happen within the next 5 years in the competition space in South Africa?
Look, I think we all have an imperative to in a sense, get the economy growing. I think it's removing some of the bottlenecks in the infrastructure is certainly critical, because no matter what we may do, say in poultry, if we can't sort out the energy problem, we're not going to resolve it. So I think those sort of basic barriers to growth need to be addressed, and some of the reforms have certainly helped. But I think what we are seeing is that partnerships across government are yielding much better outcomes than agencies or departments acting alone. And so I think that is part of the talking point now, is how can we work together so we remove a barrier to businesses going into a particular sector. But if there isn't the funders to back that up, to support the businesses, we're not going to see the outcomes. So there's a lot of areas where we can improve that collaboration. And I think that would be certainly on our wish list to be more effective as an institution.
Well, James, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Great hearing your thoughts and picking your brain this afternoon. Thank you so much for that. That was James Hodge, Economic Research Bureau's Chief Economist and Acting Deputy Commissioner for the Competition Commission.